I'm was the first in my family, my immediate family, to join the military. My younger brother also joined the reserves a few years after I did. But then my grandfather was in the Army for a brief period of time around the end of the World War II Korea era. He served in Germany for a couple of years, which isn't significant and important. But if I kind of like scale back, I think about the community that I grew up in. I grew up in Bedford, Virginia. And if you or anybody's familiar with the D-Day Memorial, yeah, so I grew up hearing all about the Bedford boys and everything there. Still remember when the D-Day Memorial was open or dedicated, then President Bush came out. They did a flyover over Bedford, Virginia. And if anyone's been through Bedford, Virginia, or maybe you haven't, you didn't realize that you blinked and you missed the exit. We don't get military flyovers very often. So that amongst the entire thing was very transformative for my life. Growing up in Bedford, would oftentimes hear the story. I worked on a farm when I was a teenager, and the older lady that was the wife of the couple I was working for out there would oftentimes, after we'd come in from baling hay, picking potatoes and stuff, she would talk about her first husband, who was one of the Bedford boys, and then talked in pretty extensive detail all these stories about the community, how the community was impacted by these young men going off to war, and then the number of them that didn't come back, the ones that did come back. So I think that, amongst many others, shaped my desire to serve. And so I ultimately did join the Virginia National Guard when I was in college in 2004. And that's how my military career started. And I believe impacted by all of those facets, most of which I think was growing up in that community, having a want and desire to serve that ultimately manifested in joining the Virginia National Guard back in 2004. And here we are over 22 years later, still in the Virginia National Guard, still serving. I take great pride in that. And I'd like to think that in some way we're continuing that through my family and community, that legacy of service for our country. So resilience is the ability to, we'll say, bounce back from any sort of difficulty, struggle, stress, trauma is oftentimes how that's articulated. And what do I do on campus? Go back a little bit in time. So coming back from my second mobilization for OIF, I realized that I wanted to be doing something different. I believe that God was very clearly directing my family's path. And so what that looked like was came back in 2008. And then by 2009, huge believer, experience in Providence. 2009 is when the Yellow Ribbon program happened. And so I was the first individual in Lynchburg College, now the University of Lynchburg, to use the Yellow Ribbon program. And that was a culmination of all of those months of trying to figure out what I've experienced, what this means, how do I, as a reservist guard soldier, wear that hat, but also in my full-time occupation, we'll say, be impacting the people, family members, service members, veterans that have been so significantly impacted by these different types of services and deployments, honestly, at that time that we had experienced. So I went into the clinical mental health field, counseling, did that in 2009. And shortly thereafter, NBCC, the National Board for Certified Counselors, I got one of their scholarships, minority scholarship, specifically to help with college education, but also as a commitment, which I feel like I really tried to be responsible for, to serve military service members, their dependents, and their families. So that started in 2009, enrolling in that program, shortly thereafter getting that scholarship. And that's the year that I started working with the Virginia Wounded Warrior Program. And you all may be familiar with that as the Virginia Veterans and Family Services now. So all of that was happening right around that same time in an academic setting, going that way, professional setting, going that way as well. And then that translated ultimately into, in 2016, being hired on here at Liberty University to try to improve our integration of services and tailoring of services and activities within the Counseling Psychological Services Office to the military connected students here on campus. I also do work with licensed substance abuse treatment practitioner here in Virginia as well. So we're two hats there. There's a lot of overlap, unfortunately, within those two disciplines. So a long-winded answer, but it started coming out of back-to-back deployments, reorienting, and I believe God leading us into this, we'll call it profession, but really is what we do. One of the benefits and also challenges of remaining in service right now is what I thought I knew in 2008, 2009, when this started, has evolved tremendously over nearly a couple decades now of being professionally clinical counseling oriented, as well as personal experience called lived experience of being that service member, having a wife and kids that are all part of that military connected community, seeing their interactions, dynamics that are impacted by ongoing military service. So yeah, I think it's still evolving in many ways, but I'm very grateful that I believe God, like I said, God ordained prompt on my heart and life to put me in this direction was just the first step on many steps. And I no idea where to end. You know what I mean? So we're still living through and evolving into an understanding of what that means. Now it looks like it's starting to narrow a little bit. Working with the Wounded Warrior program, it was much more expansive. We're across the Commonwealth. Now it looks like it's focusing on, again, the academic side, looking at how students are impacted by this current military service. As I said, we're looking at national actively serving National Guard and Reserve students, but also those that have or maybe haven't transitioned out, the veterans themselves or wives, children, military connected communities that have been impacted, are being impacted by either their spouse or loved one's military service.